I'm Ioana. I'm a visual artist and I work with architecture, illustration and animation. Most often I do comic books and stories about humans and the city they live in. I guess my connection is rather human than scientifical, in the sense that most of my material comes from observations of the life around me, the little things that most often pass by unnoticed. And I think there's a lot of juice in simple day-to-day life. There are many experiences that had elements that would fit, but I'm gonna say the main ones. I'm gonna talk about the main ones. It was actually the first and the last one. The first one at ICGEB, where we learned about genetic engineering and DNA sequences and using CRISPR technology and things like that, made me zoom in much more than I had ever before. Whereas the last experience, when we had a huge talk about the universe, the start of the universe, the timeline of that, made my brain zoom out much more than it usually does. So in the end, I had a much wider view of things, and it actually made me see and perceive things that I had never perceived before. I'd actually define both of them with one word, and that would be curiosity. I think one of the most important things you need to have to do either of them is actually curiosity. I guess art is about taking things that are on your inside and putting them outside for the others to see, whereas science is usually about a person trying to understand things that are on the outside and try to appropriate them and understand them, and in a way put them from the outside on the inside. So it's the opposite process. Art would have a lot to gain if it looked at science for as a resource for subjects to explore artistically. And science could learn a bit more about empathy from art. Yes. Before I came to this residency, I associated science with a lot of technology, the digital world, robots taking over, artificial intelligence, and so on, and all these new media experiences. And while I was here, I actually learned that there is so much more about science in processes that are very natural and human and very close to our reality. Okay. It's really hard to make a top three because there were many amazing moments, some of them related to the actual research centers, some of them simply related to the city. But I guess the first really impressive moment was at Elettra, when we went inside this lab and it was filled with so many machinery and wires all over, and in a way it looked like in a science fiction movie. But among all those wires and all that aluminum and all those screens, you could find pieces of human life such as a half-eaten sandwich or a shoe left in a corner, and all sorts of human stuff. Then second impressive moment was at Fab Lab, when after a very deep and impressive talk that Carlo gave us about quantum physics and the theory of relativity and complex geometrical constructions, he ended up telling us that either way he could never tell the equation of a flower, and it was really impressive. Then a third moment would rather be related to the city. It was when one evening we went just in time for sunset. We went to the church up the hill, and it had just rained, and we were on top of everything. We could see the sea, we could see the port, we could see all the houses on the hills, and behind us there was this really big and impressive concrete church with a very strange and imposing architecture, and we were the only people there, and everything was really silent, and the lights were beautiful. So that if I could keep one moment from Trieste, the city, that would be it. Okay. Number one is not a scientist that I met. It's actually Paula, the person who organized this trip for us, and who made it possible. And in a way, she became a sort of role model, because it was impressive to see how to hear her story, and to listen to her talk about all her interests. And then another person who influenced me was Miruna, the organizer of this residency from Romania, because she's a really impressive woman for her age, and she's had a lot of experiences, and she's done a lot. So I guess, to sum it up, I just met two potential very good role models for further in life. Mă fac să râd. The simulation of chewing gum remains a mystery, and the people who were with me at CISA will understand this. That's all I have to say. There are a few things this whole experience taught me. One was to change my opinions and stop associating science with technology so much, and appreciate the analog part of it. The second was a confirmation with one of my own preoccupation, which is that of time passing. And I think humans have a really interesting relation with time. We're afraid that it's passing by. We crave for the lost time. We fear that it's irreversible. And during this residency, we had a lot of talks when we ended up discussing time, for example, in the sense that we're running out of time to save this planet, and stuff like that. So I'm gonna try to do what I usually do, animations, but do them in an analog way, using not the computer, but a substance that changes and moves, and that I can somehow control, but not completely. I have identified this as ferrofluid, so I will use the magnetic properties of iron filings to make this substance move around. And I will try to tackle the subject of human versus time in a few short animations, which will actually be real live objects. I guess one of the most important part was all those discussions I was telling you about regarding time and our general fear of time passing, whether we're scientists, artists, or anything else. And another thing was actually a very practical object that I found at Fab Lab in Carlo's workshop. It was actually, I guess, sort of an educational object. It was a transparent plastic box filled with 6 magnets, and it had a second piece, which was another plastic piece you could push more or less into that box, and it would change the pressure, making the magnets interact with each other. And I really liked the practical aspect of it, and I really liked the fact that you could play with it. And I think I will try to take this into account when I do this. I also like to make an object which people can play with and understand how it works. I've actually gathered a lot of material for some future comic books or animations, and it's about scientist humor and scientists being humans after all. For example, there's Carlo, who is a poet at heart, talking about flowers and physics. There's the magician scientists. Then there was this man who would talk to us about the flying patterns of eagles, and actually he didn't have a presentation, he just basically acted the whole thing in front of us, and it was amazing to see how talented he was as a storyteller. So I'm gonna definitely use this in the future. I've learned that art and science definitely need to close the gap between each other, and most importantly, close the gap between them and the rest of the world, because in several occasions they were referred as domains sitting in ivory towers. And people being afraid that they might be inaccessible. Another thing that I've learned is that we're probably all worried about where the world is heading at this moment, that we're at the crossroads, and that the best solutions will most definitely come from all the domains interacting with each other, and not from people staying closed within their particular domains. I definitely recommend any kind of artist to apply. I've learned that the more diverse the group and the more diverse your preoccupation, the better it is. I had a fear before that you might need to be particularly interested in science to apply, but I find that it's not at all the case. It might even be the opposite. More importantly, I find that you need to definitely stay authentic to yourself in general, but also in this particular situation, because I think the most interesting piece of art, whatever, will result only if you can remain faithful to what you usually do and absorb the information naturally, and not just do something because you think it might be appreciated. Because on the long term, it will only make you go farther and farther from what you actually want. And one last thing, I guess, is to have no fear and to actually just apply and do it.